Great, Janet. Thanks for that introduction. What a year, and what a year to look forward to. I think there's quite a bit of enthusiasm, and we'll come to that. I'd like to welcome you to the panel discussion on cell therapy commercialization in oncology. We're very lucky to have a very accomplished panel of speakers today. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and give a little bit of background of themselves and their company. But before doing that, I wanted to take a moment to set up the conversation we're going to have. So today's panelists represent a broad array of companies with different backgrounds, different therapeutic approaches, and different stages of the company, everything from startup all the way through an established large biopharma. Additionally, our panelists have all demonstrated the ability to launch products in adjacent sectors and markets, so we'll be able to take advantage of that expertise and draw some parallels to what the differences and what some of the similarities are. And then finally, I do acknowledge that this is a conversation today about autologous therapies in cancer. That's not a sort of a bias on our part towards autologous therapies and away from allogeneic therapies. It was just a consequence of the panelists that we've selected, and we thought it would make an interesting conversation. So I'm going to set this up in the following way. Obviously, through Janet's presentation, we can see that there is both excitement therapeutically, good clinical outcomes, great progress as evidenced by the number of clinical trials, and importantly, the number that really stood out to me was the patients enrolled in those clinical trials reaching 60 to 70,000. That's huge, I think. As many of you know, though, as we start to talk about therapies and advanced therapies in general, and we start to have conversations about autologous therapies, we quickly come to conversations about cost, complexity, reimbursement, and ultimately scalability and driving market adoption. So we'll cover those topics, but rather than sort of jumping from part to part or piece to piece, we thought it would be interesting to have the conversation along three themes. Now, these themes are very interconnected, and we will sort of try to let people keep score on where we are by transitioning from one to the other. But the three themes that I'd like to have this conversation sort of follow is first around business and commercial elements of bringing advanced therapies to market. Everything from fundraising, dialogues with investors. A lot of you are publicly traded companies now, so I do appreciate there may be some things you're not eligible or able to disclose to us, but we'll talk as much about that as we can, and what it takes to launch products in the space today. The second theme I'd like to explore is a little bit about the biology, the therapeutic approaches. How are the changes in the therapies and the changes in the engineering of cells likely to materialize and influence the commercialization of these products going forward? And then finally, time permitting, we only have 45 minutes, so we're going to try to cover a lot of territory, but remain focused. We'll talk about the complex manufacturing and supply chain challenges. So that's the setup. I'll now ask each of the panelists. Maybe we'll start with Joanne on the far side and work our way back, and then I'll take over again from some of the questions. Thanks.
All right. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm amazed at how many people there are in the room. So anyway, I'm Joanne Beck. I head up the pharmaceutical development and operations for Celgene. I've been with Celgene for about 3 years. And one of the reasons that I got very excited about joining Celgene was the interest and investment that Celgene had made in cell therapy. Tremendous opportunity. Celgene actually, and I don't know how many people are aware of this actually in the room, had a cell therapy, Celgene Cellular Therapeutics organization for many, many, many years. And once cell therapy CAR-T, in the form of CAR-T, started appearing, Celgene very thoughtfully and progressively invested in it through partnerships with Juno, but also with Bluebird Bio. And we continued to invest more and more as we saw compelling results in clinical trials. Last year, we acquired Juno, and we continue to have a very robust relationship with Bluebird Bio, where we're developing 2 programs. The focus is obviously multiple myeloma, the target being BCMA, and also leukemias and lymphomas with CD19. The pipeline is pretty deep. By the acquisition of Juno, we acquired a number of different assets, obviously Lysocell, which is pretty late stage, but also a very robust pipeline So far, we have treated more than 700 patients, and in this field that's evolving, having that data set cannot be underestimated. It's a tremendous advantage to have a data set as we're trying to understand the impact, especially of product quality on clinical outcomes. Celgene also obviously has a whole separate pipeline of small molecule drugs and biologics, but it seems to me that all these three platforms, and there's nuances in those platforms as well, work very harmoniously together. Science is science and engineering is engineering. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity for a company like Celgene to advance innovative therapies regardless of the platform, the technological platform that they're in.
Good morning. I'm Steve Kelly, President and CEO of CARISMA Therapeutics. As in the biotech continuum, we're at the exact opposite end of the spectrum that Celgene is. We're a private venture-backed company. We just closed a Series A earlier this year. Our core technology is around CAR macrophages. We are developing our CAR macrophage platform in oncology. We think it's well differentiated from the other approaches in cell therapy. We think that the nature of a macrophage actively tracking to the site of the tumor is great, and then a unique effector function, phagocytosis and antigen presentation should lend itself well to treatment of solid tumors. We are currently developing our lead program, our HER2 CAR macrophage, and anticipate entering the clinic later this year. And then we're starting to build out a pipeline of other assets targeting other antigens for solid tumors. So thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel.
My name is Chris Vann. I'm the CEO and commercial leader for Autolus. I'm very much in the middle of the panel, actually, both geographically as well as from a position of where the company stands. Autolus is actually 4 years old, spun out of UCL CAR T-cell research. Our principal focus in clinic is obviously autologous T-cell therapy, but the actual name is actually derived from autonomous bodies, because what we aim to do is we aim to take immune cells and change properties so that they can better see the cancer, that they can also have properties which will actually arm them against the defenses that cancers actually throw up, give us a degree of pharmacological control if necessary, and also improve persistence if necessary. So very much the company is focused on reprogramming immune cells, particularly T cells. And the company has 5 programs in clinic, phase 1-2 clinic, for 6 indications currently. In addition to moving some of those hopefully into registration during the course of 2019, we also hope to bring new products, which are improvements on those existing products, also into the clinic. We're able to do that because we can actually deliver the programming in a single viral vector, and our manufacturing is based on a platform which is common for all of our products.
Well, good morning. Can you hear me? Yes, perfect. Thank you for the organizers for inviting us, of course, on the panel. My name is Maria Fardis. I'm president and CEO at Iovance Biotherapeutics. I guess I am at the other end somewhat, although Celgene is much larger market cap. Our company is a public company. Our market cap is about $1 billion, plus minus 200, depending on the day, of course. We are in the business of developing cell therapies for solid tumors. We have licensed an asset that is called tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes from NCI back in 2011, and the company is in the business of taking this product, developing it, and commercializing it. From a development perspective, we are in late-stage phase 2. We have met with FDA, and we have agreed with them on a registration path. And in 2019, we are starting that registration program in support of getting our TIL approved for at least metastatic melanoma. That's the first indication we are pursuing. TIL is very much a platform, and again, we are pursuing it for multiple indications, similar to you. In cervical, head and neck, and non-small cell lung cancer, we are pursuing understanding activity of TIL. In addition, as part of our regulatory path, we also have received an RMAT designation from FDA. So this has been particularly beneficial to understand what ARM has been able to provide us as part of a development path with talking to regulators, particularly in the U.S.
Great, thanks for those introductions. Now to the interesting part of the conversation. So I do appreciate that not everybody can sort of answer perhaps all these questions, but I did want to start with some business fundamentals and talk a little bit about, for the benefit of those in the audience that are perhaps pre-IPO or just getting started looking for their first round. Steve, I might start with you because you're kind of the early guy on the stage. I guess that's the way to preface it, but to say you're interacting with investors looking for raising money. I'm curious, what advice or how are you sort of experiencing the change in the climate? What are investors asking for, and what advice would you give to those that are sort of pre-money?
Yeah, for our purposes, we started our fundraising process in, I'd say, a year ago from now, and didn't close our Series A until June. And I think that what we saw is fewer bets on technology with larger bite sizes. So a concentrated investment. I think that the challenges that we faced in articulating our story were fundamentally why our technology would work and what the promise of it was. And then how we would execute and go after our lead programs. And I think having that clarity, and I think there were through multiple iterations to actually deliver that clarity was essential in getting the investment that we did. And I was looking at the slide earlier that was up, and I thought we did really well with the 60 million raised so far. We didn't even show up on the slide, but. So you can definitely see that there are very concentrated bets on new technology.
Great. And then sort of extending that as you go into the mid-stage or late development stages, and let me, Chris, go to you with Autolus. Congratulations on your NASDAQ listing, et cetera. When you talk to shareholders and other interested stakeholders, what's the mood? What are they looking for from Autolus?
So clearly, I think, to echo your comments, I think you have to be very clear where your differentiation lies. And the other very important thing is if you have plans, you have to deliver on the plans. And I think the mixture of those two things actually does allow you to raise finance even in a difficult environment.
And Maria, same thread there. When your engagements with investors and stakeholder shareholders, what's the conversation that you're having? I guess the question underlying all of this I'm trying to figure out, are investors becoming more sophisticated over the years?
Yeah, definitely. In 2018, we actually raised over 400 million from a public market. And so you're correct that I think that the key for us has been delivery. At the end of the day, our product has been shown to be efficacious by Steve Rosenberg and NCI and a number of other institutions. So efficacy wasn't really much of a question. Everybody knew that this product is going to work. I think the question was, and you probably will be heading in that direction, can you manufacture? Can you manufacture consistently? Can you, with autologous products, what would this look like from region to region? Are you able to control that process? And really, do you think you can commercialize a product of that nature? And I think one of our key messages was, yes, absolutely. We needed to, of course, optimize the manufacturing process significantly, which we did. That was one of the first tasks that we focused on back in 2016. But once we managed that manufacturing process and we tech transferred it into multiple providers and started dosing patients, we gave the confidence to investors that, yes, this is something that can be done in a central way, completely under control, reproducibly over and over. With that, then we had to go back and generate data. So investors are becoming very savvy, very data-oriented. The hope and a dream that might have been, 10 years ago in biotech space doesn't really exist. People are about, show me the data and let me assess the data. And also, I think investors are becoming a lot more savvy in the sense that they have their own analysts, they have their own scientists on staff, and they look at your data, they analyze your data, and once they're convinced, they're willing to put their resources behind the company. So I don't think there's any magic to this. It's just grind, and we have to, as drug developers, we have to stay focused on developing the drug, and once you do, it's recognized.
Great. Joanne, I'll come to you on this next one, sort of looking internally in terms of stakeholders within Celgene. You have a very admirable pipeline covering lots of different indications and areas. How does the cell therapy feed up to management? What's their enthusiasm? What's their excitement there?
Yes, tremendous enthusiasm. I just wanted to follow up a little bit on what Maria was saying. So manufacturing, process development, analytics, manufacturing, supply chain is there. Every company like Celgene has these organizations and the know-how and the infrastructure to deliver engineering, process engineering, and so on. I think it just happens in the background. Nobody really knows it's happening unless something goes wrong, right? In this case, it's right in the front, and we can do it. It's just that it takes focus and time, and the organization cannot take for granted assurance of supply. You have to put all the pieces in place so that the patients can be assured that their medicine is going to get to them. So there's been tremendous support internally for this. It's just that I think in general, it came as a surprise that manufacturing actually could play such an important role in a therapy. Because even monoclonal antibodies, after 25 years of focus and work by Genentech, Amgen, the pioneers in monoclonal antibody manufacturing, they had laid down the foundation for this. So this is unusual, I think.
Yeah, I mean, maybe to add on to that point, I mean, the success of the medicines, which is amazing, is also caused some of those challenges. The fact that they went to market very quickly, quite often based upon academic manufacturing processes, has really created some of those challenges. The centers initially didn't have the capacity or even the things like the financial codes for actually the procedures to actually support the delivery of these medicines. I think the realization today is that you need to affix your manufacturing process before you enter registration studies. And what we're seeing, which should be very encouraging for everyone, is we're seeing a maturation of the supply network. So we're seeing really, revolutionary developments are actually really placing us in a much better place, with the future products. And it may be one of those markets for that reason where it's actually, there's some advantages to actually being a fast follower because many of these things are being sorted out in the market now.
Yeah, a theme that we've talked about at these conferences for years is that the industry as a whole is building the plane while we're flying it. That's a term I've used quite frequently. So, Chris, to extend your comment, where are we in the last few years? Because one of the things we were going to circle back to is the panel's experience in biologics, now going into these advanced therapies. A, where are you finding the skill sets and the people who can help in process development and expand and improve that? And then B, how are you translating that biologics know-how and saying, well, this might work, this might not? Can you give me, maybe Maria, we'll start with you.
Yeah, definitely. So let me just step back because I want to echo on everything that my panelists also said. I'm a chemist by training, and I was shocked when I started in a cell therapy field and understanding that there is no supply chain, there's no known supply chain for every item, every single plasticware, every single liquid you need to put into that media. You have to source it, identify it, get to know the provider, assure that you have adequate supply agreements in place and that they're secure and they're able to consistently and reproducibly provide you what you need. And that's extremely unique in cell therapy. I'm sure over time we will have a lot more redundancy and we will solve that issue. But in the meantime, and I think a lot of our processes are very unique to each of the product. The product is a result of the process. So there's two questions that you asked, and they're incredibly relevant. One is the resources in terms of FTEs, the staff that you find in trying to build that organization, and two, the actual supply. For us, the process itself is unique enough that there's really not a lot of people that have done TIL before. Either we hire former NCI staff or staff that might have worked at MD Anderson or otherwise, or we go into collaborations with them and we train our team over time. And both have been true in our case. We have former NCI people as well as we train our own team members. And again, we are developing our own new process, so the new process is developed by the team. There's really not a place to go and recruit. There's not a university to go recruit for manufacturing TILs, or frankly, I don't think there's any for general cell therapies. In terms of supply, we definitely develop a very close relationship with our CMOs. All of our vendors, providers, we put them under manufacturing supply agreements to the degree they would be open to. We put them under quality agreement. We assure there's redundancy in the lines, as well as assuring that there's enough on hand, depending on the expiration date of the product, of course, that we are not put in a position of risk. So there's a significant amount of time and effort is put into the supply chain to ensure everything is secure and reproducible.
And that's helpful. And we will get a sort of a deeper dive into the supply chain thing. And the one thing to amplify what you just said is part of your supply chain is a very heterogeneous population of patients very often, so that adds complexity. But before we go there, I'm just going to come back to another comment you made, and I'll ask you to start again and then maybe go back. You made the comment that the RMAT designation sort of materially improved whether awareness or some of your conversations you were having with the regulators. Tell us about that. What is the RMAT designation, and then sort of how is that? And do any of you other panelists sort of seek the RMAT designation for your products or have it already?
Excellent question. We targeted specifically RMAT designation due to the fact that it is specifically focused for biological regenerative medicine products. It is a significant benefit, in my opinion. It allows for continuous dialogue with the agency. CBER has been particularly collaborative and communicative, and I think that under RMAT, you're able to reach out to the RPM, start a dialogue, ask a question, send your questions to the clinical reviewers or otherwise, and be able to get real-time feedback, which is incredibly valuable for us. It allows us to correct action as necessary, if necessary, in process, and not wait for end of phase 2, various other gated meetings. So it also allows for a rolling review and a submission that could be quite beneficial for smaller companies, or data that could be matured and additional data could be provided as part of the review period. It also allows, we have targeted very late-line patient population, so the agency recognized the fact that this is a very much of an unmet medical need from a patient population perspective, so we had received fast-track designation as part of our interactions as well with the agency. So that totality of the package has allowed for getting guidance upfront and early, and make sure that we don't get into a BLA situation where they're surprised or there's a question that needs to be resolved. It allows us to resolve it upfront.
Great. And Chris, in the UK, where Autolus is headquartered, do you have a similar path or something?
So I would say that actually on a global basis, health authorities and other key stakeholders are very open to discussions with people who bring disruptive therapies. So naturally, as you could imagine, what we will do is we will engage health authorities across the globe, and we have plans to do that for each of our products. I think it really helps not just with the investment community, but obviously you get real-time feedback on your plans. You also have advantages of faster approvals, and in some countries that can also influence reimbursement. So obviously it's a very important part of our standard business, but it's certainly something that we would do for all of our products.
Fantastic. Steve, do you have comments?
No, we do not have our MAT designation, although we intend to pursue it. But the one thing that I would say is that we have had very fruitful dialogue with the FDA already. We had our pre-IND meeting in November of 2017. Okay, it's amplified. But we certainly are having a fruitful dialogue with the FDA and intend to do so continuing. I think that they're very helpful at this stage of the company for us.
Great. And then perhaps through Juno and Celgene's experience in the space, what's your regulatory approach?
So our regulatory approach has been to get various different designations. We have a lot of products. But regardless of designation, it's been really impressive how open the regulatory authorities have been across the world to have open conversations and dialogue. I've been particularly impressed by Dr. Marks and how educated he seems to be. I was in a small workshop with him just a few weeks ago at New Jersey Institute of Innovation, and his ability to actually have a very open dialogue, his knowledge of the subject matter was incredibly impressive. I've never seen anything like this in 30 years. So I think everybody is open and willing to have discussions and help move these therapies forward.
Yeah, I think as part of ARM's mission to sort of foster the regulatory partnerships, relationships, there's been quite open and productive dialogue between the groups. So I think that's been helpful for the ARM constituency as well. Yeah, please.
So in terms of EU regulatory, and I know that this question came up, We have had great interaction with EU health authorities as well. We have submitted a number of CTAs in Europe, and a number of them are approved, and studies are active both in melanoma and cervical. So I see the same pattern. I echo what you're sharing, that the health authorities are very collaborative, and if they don't like something, they'll allow you to explain and respond, and they don't close the CTA. So this is a very different landscape in cell therapy that I see from regulators. Very collaborative, very early on, they're willing to lend a hand and assure that a program is proceeding.
Great. I'll use that to shamelessly plug the meeting on the Med. So anybody looking to go to Barcelona in April, please join ARM at the meeting on the Med to have such those conversations. Great. Sort of extending this, the final comment in this theme of kind of the business advancement, global reach, and sort of when is the right time to take or think about the product? You kind of set this off nicely. It's better to focus in your region, geography, get a footprint, get started, and then go globally? Or what's your strategy, Joanne? Maybe I'll start there and come back this way.
Well, even if we had a strategy to focus on a particular region, let's say the US or the EU, we're not allowed to do that. There is a lot of excitement across the globe, and so we are getting requests and engagement everywhere from all kinds of countries in the world, Asia, APAC region, et cetera. So our strategy is to, be thoughtful and take into account the task at hand. It's enormously complicated to launch in different countries products as complex as this. But, we have a systematic way of plan to launch globally.
Yes, certainly some of the larger markets are out there from an American perspective. So,
but they're all very different.
They are very different. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think choice of centres and where you operate is initially governed by the desire, obviously, to work with centres who have got expertise in phase one. I don't think you really care where the geography is. I think as you move to phase two, very typically, there's such a high unmet desire, if you like, to receive treatments that you can go to virtually anywhere in the world and run these studies, providing that the quality of the clinical studies is good. So we don't limit ourselves by geography. We look very carefully at who we're going to collaborate with in terms of centres.
Gotcha. Final question in this business theme that we started is, are the therapeutic spaces getting crowded? I know we're having tremendous clinical successes in the wet tumors, but solid tumors, obviously a number of you have programs there. I'd like to go to that next. But are we overmining these therapeutic areas, or is there enough out there for everybody?
Maybe I'll start. Given that we certainly are targeting solid tumors, It is in U.S. It's definitely competitive, and it is becoming very quite a challenge to enroll patients. At ASCO in this particular past year in 2018, investigators were KOLs on the podium shared the number of patients that are expected to be enrolled in various indications in solid tumor, and the number of patients to be enrolled are larger than there are. So we do need to be thinking about how we position ourselves, which regions we go to, and how we strategize. I do want to echo on the question you were asking before, going to various regions. I think that's maybe one way of thinking about how to develop our products. We in Iovance have thought about perhaps considering certain regions as we think about where the patient prevalence is. A great example is cervical cancer in US versus ex-US. In US, there's been a great undertaking for HPV vaccination, and the prevalence of cervical cancer has been lowered, although it's still not going away, has certainly plateaued, and the number of deaths is about a quarter of the number of patients that are identified on an annual basis. In EU or other regions, that's not the case. Unfortunately, in EU, even in the Big Five, the prevalence of cervical cancer is twice as large as it is in US, and the death rate is double. So, the diagnosis is worse in other regions. So when we think about where to go for a certain disease, it is helpful for us to be thinking about where the patients are and how much available care there is. So we do think about it. The same way we're thinking about our Asia strategy based on patient population, One consideration for us would be, of course, having local manufacturing, specifically in countries such as China, where tumor and blood products may not be very easy to go across the borders. Local presence is required to be able to conduct local studies. So it is important to be thinking about which patients and where. And in the US, we certainly are facing challenges in terms of enrollment into solid tumor studies.
And Chris, amplifying that on sort of market access, that's another term that we use quite frequently in the industry, and just saying, you know, as the regulatory landscape shifts, as more and more companies emerge on the scene, there's ultimately the need to translate these into commercial products and then help foster a climate where these can be widely adopted. What's Autolus thinking about there?
So I think, you know, the key thing is that access is normally and should be driven by the differentiation and the value you bring to patients. So I think this is a wonderful area to be in, because most of our lives in Big Pharma, we actually work on incremental benefit. This is one of the great pleasures of moving to a company like Autolus, and I was actually at Roche before, so that's a company that did also bring, you know, antibody therapies and other things to market which were very differentiated. But I still believe that there will be the opportunity to do that, to bring products to market if they're clearly differentiated. What we may have to do, of course, is we may have to work on different reimbursement models to support the access in various countries. And I think that, you know, that will actually require as much innovation and as much of a differentiated approach as some of the science that we're also bringing.
And likely a 2 to 3 hour panel discussion just on that topic, right?
Yeah. But again, you know, one of the other nice things is that's another group of stakeholders who are very open to discussions and very open to finding a way to grant access to patients because they understand the value of these treatments.
Great. Well, I think that's a great segue opportunity to talk about the next theme of this panel, which is about what I call the biology or the therapeutic focus. So maybe to put it into some friendly term, if you went down and you thought, what is your therapy's superpower? Why is it different? And how's it perhaps better than the person sitting next to you? And Steve, you want to start?
Sure, absolutely.
Sorry.
Ours is the best.
Exactly. That's right.
No, I think that what differentiates us is that some of the T-cell approaches are obviously trying to mimic an adaptive immunity, and what we're trying to do is mimic an innate immunity and generate a natural adaptive immune response. And I think that that's the phagocytosis in and of itself is great, and I think it'll be a useful tool. But if we can present antigen of that tumor cell and generate a true adaptive immune response with memory, I think it's going to be a transformational approach.
Joanne, do you want to dive into these waters?
I'll try to be as evasive as possible because we are the best, obviously. No, I'm just kidding. So I guess I will go back to the why and say that, you know, I'm looking at this as a pipeline and as an aggregate of therapies at different stages of innovation, with our two products that are furthest ahead being the first generation. They're quite different from each other. BB2121 and JCAR17 lysocell are very different, quite different technology platforms, with the next generation coming in. So I think the superpower that we have is the fact that we have a pipeline and we're continuously learning from that pipeline. Versus trying to say that one product is better than another product. And I said this before, I think there is, having a big data set is really, really important in order to be able to draw conclusions that are based on data versus guessing that something is better or is more efficacious or less efficacious, or it is more safe or less safe. You're using the data. And also that data set is allowing us to do some correlative analytics and really tie in that translational data with the product data more and more and more as we get more patients in, treat more patients, get all their data, and then correlated with data that comes out of the analytics of the product.
Yeah, certainly establishing a franchise and learning on the job, if you will, or just getting the experience and the data behind us is going to be critical. Sure. Chris?
Yeah, if I take one of the practical examples of Autolus's pipeline, the Auto3 product that we have for B-cell malignancies has both a CD19 and CD22 independently acting CARs. Why is that? It's because, back to your point, understanding the translational medicine is very important. If you look at pediatric ALL, the main cause of relapse is actually antigen escape. So obviously arming a T cell with two independent CARs is a very useful thing to do. If you then take it forward and you go into something DLBCL, where that's also important, but the primary driver of escape seems to be upregulation of checkpoint inhibition. Obviously, you know, one of the other technologies we have in our stable is a dominant negative SHP2 that we can put into the cell to render it immune to checkpoint inhibition. So I think that, you know, as we go forward, we'll very much use that translational information, and this is what makes this area so exciting, because as you're actually deploying a therapy that has a major differentiation and a major benefit to patients, you're also learning about what you should be doing next in terms of what would be the next property or the next approach that would actually hopefully render even greater benefit to patients.
And Iovance takes a different approach. Rather than relying on genetic manipulation of the cells to introduce targets or receptors, you're, with the TILT therapies, working to improve just the microenvironment and the culturability.
So let me step back for a second. I think the difference here is, let's start with heme versus solid tumor. In heme space, there's been significant progress made. I think Janet did a beautiful job of highlighting what has been done in the heme space in terms of progress, either from cell therapy, or there's been a lot of small molecules that has come into that space in the past 5 years. Excellent products are now available for hematologic malignancies. For solid tumors, we have had great breakthroughs which involve mostly checkpoints, which is a chronic therapy. It also causes sometimes adverse events that may continue beyond even discontinuation of a product. So let's sort of break it down with heme, solid tumor. We are in solid tumor space. Now, in the solid tumor space, there's not a lot of cell therapies. I actually default to Joanne's point, that actually have data in patients. We have over 100 patients that we have dosed in multiple indications with our brand new sort of generation 2 product that we have developed at Iovance. And we see efficacy in extremely late line patients, which is quite impressive. These patients really are out of options. So in order to sort of define what is a differentiator with Iovance, the therapy is cell therapy targeting solid tumor. It's a one-time treatment, and the benefits are seen sometimes years out, particularly when we administer the product to earlier line patients. Today's patients are not the same as Rosenberg's patients. Today's patients are, 3, 4, 5 prior lines of therapy has been administered to them. So where we are is we have focused on late line therapy due to our clear regulatory strategy, but from a clinical and commercial perspective, earlier line, of course, any immunotherapy would do better in earlier line patients.
Well, I think that's going to be the next big nut to crack is the solid tumors, and all of you are working in those programs. So that's going to be an interesting coming years to see the data roll out from those trials. In terms of the biology, again, one of the things we often talk about is the engineering of cells. So notwithstanding your comments just now, and I fully agree with what you're saying, the ability to manipulate. Can any of you give sort of a peek behind the curtain on the approaches you're taking for introducing? I know there's lots of conversation about using lenti and adenovirus or AAV to sort of introduce these changes. Are you looking at non-viral methods and other genetic manipulations, and what does that look like?
I'll kick that off because I didn't follow up on the comment on genetic modification. We are genetically modifying TILs. They're just not in clinic. And we do not use viral genetic modification methods. We use knock-in or knock-out methods that allow for permanent genetic modification or transient genetic modifications. So we actually have 2 collaborations. One is with Pharmaceuticals, which is using RNAi technology, which is more of a transient genetic modification. And we do have a fully genetic modification, which is in a collaboration with Cellectis, using zinc finger and modifying the genome. And we are expecting, hopefully, at least one of them to enter clinic in 2019.
Chris?
Yeah, I was going to say that's another panel discussion that's worth 3 hours, because I think there's different ways of doing it. We use both lenti and retroviral. We use them for different reasons, which again we could discuss at another time. I think that one of the great things if you're a patient is there's going to be various ways to get to the same point. We also, by the way, have solid tumor data presented at AACR, and I think all of us on the panel would be optimistic that we will be able to get into solid tumors.
Great.
Yeah, for our purposes, actually, the viral vector has been a very challenging thing for us. Neither lenti nor AAV can actually transduce macrophages at a sufficient capability. So we had to go with an adenovirus, a proprietary adenovirus construct, which is challenging in our commercial, or looking at our supply chain, because not too many people work in that area. So it was something that we had to work through. And we are certainly looking at other ways, non-viral ways to transduce the cells. It just so happens that using an adenovirus also puts our macrophages in M1 polarization. So that's an essential component of our work. So it's a complex situation that we're looking to solve, and we'll continue to work on it.
Great. Well, that's also a great segue into the last section, which we were going to talk a little bit about supply chain and manufacturing, which we've been covering sort of anecdotally around the conversation here. If we think about this as a process, patient-specific therapies in the context of, let's just say, vein-to-vein therapies, as a supply chain, what would you point to as the one or two weakest links in the supply chain that needs the attention of the industry? Joanne?
We're building on a lot of the links, right? So I think they're becoming stronger by the day. Right now, I think that, and this is my own opinion, obviously, that we are changing a bit the paradigm of, and we were talking about this at ARM yesterday a little bit, about how we're changing the paradigm of how physicians deliver care. And so the treatment centers are now becoming an extension of our company, sort of, because we have to train them specifically how to deliver cell therapies. And I think that is a big change. And it's not completely out of under our control. It will take a lot of work to train and certify all these treatment centers. So in my opinion, that's actually something that we need to work together as an industry to strengthen that link, and try to harmonize as much as possible how these therapies, how these treatments are delivered at the treatment centers.
Yeah, and the UK has made a nice progress there, setting up the Advanced Therapy Treatment Center, the ATTC model. I think is going to be interesting to keep an eye on. Steve? Same question.
Yeah, I think that your question, where are the weakest links? I'm not so sure that we're at a stage that we can answer that. But there are two things that do concern me as we're developing our program, and that is cost of goods and capacity, especially in the solid tumor space. I think that in either case, if you have an approval with a solid tumor indication, the numbers of patients that you're talking about are significantly larger than the heme patients, and so the cost against the healthcare system, as well as the ability to manufacture sufficient supply for those is concerning to us, and I'm hoping that everyone solves that before we get there.
Great.
Yeah, so I'll actually echo the comments of both of my colleagues on the panel. I think the first thing is for manufacturing, clearly the most important thing is fully enclosed manufacturing, which is automated, because that will actually improve substantially both the capacity to scale and also the cost of the treatments. And then if I actually look at what we need to do, I actually came to Autolus because of my oncology background, but then realized that I'd actually worked in helping Roche establish its transplant business in the US. And that was actually a more relevant type of marketing background, because bringing the services, the support, the fully integrated supply and delivery and training model is very important. And I couldn't echo exactly what you're saying. I think we need to harmonize that, make it easier for the centers, because it's actually in everyone's benefit to reduce the hurdle to actually gain access to these medicines.
Thanks.
So we use tumor to vein, not vein to vein, but nonetheless, I'll answer your question. I think it's a common supply chain question. There's not one item that's rate limiting. You solve one, you go to the next one, then you solve that one, you go to the next one, you solve one. So there's a whole slew of items for us that we have had to source resource, assuring that there's a second supply. And I think that this space has a lot of room for additional vendors and suppliers to come in. So I would encourage additional competition in that sense. The one that is likely the most difficult in terms of being rate limiting is the CMOs themselves. The facilities, the availability of a fixed room, availability of a CMO with capacity as you need it, as when you're ready to go into clinic, was something we had to deal with and struggle back in 2016. I think it's getting better, but it's still not the moment you decide it's available. You have to reserve it, get into the facility, do a significant amount of tech transfer, and then you may be able to sort of get the CMO up and running. So for us, I think that's actually one of the bigger issues. And our solution was long-term. It's a good idea to have your own manufacturing facility. I wouldn't want to have spent the money up front just until we were sure that FDA would agree with our strategy and would agree with our patient population. But CMOs seem to be actually our bottleneck of the process.
Great, thanks. We are at time. I had another 30 or 40 questions for the panel. We can't do justice to any of these conversations in just 45 minutes, but please join me in thanking the panels for, I think, a great discussion.